Hello, my name is Nolan Rhodes, and this is the presentation portion of the research paper for CJS 360, History Perspective of Criminal Justice. Today I will be discussing how the September 11th terrorist attacks impacted law enforcement in the United States. The tragic events that unfolded that morning came in the form of 4 hijacked airplanes. The first 2 hit the World Trade Center, the 2 major buildings of the World Trade Center. The third hit the Pentagon, and a fourth, believed to be destined for the White House, was crash landed into a Pennsylvania field. Almost 3,000 American lives were lost that day. As a product of those terrorist attacks, the federal government created the Department of Homeland Security. It did this by combining several existing agencies such as Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the Coast Guard, and the Secret Service. Its main goal was to protect the United States from acts of terrorism. Information sharing plays a huge role with the Department of Homeland Security. This is important for DHS because not only can they need to share information in a quick, accurate manner with other federal law enforcement agencies, it also helps with sharing in local law enforcement agencies, in order to stop a terrorist attack before it happens, or find terrorists before they can get enough funding or get the supplies they need to actually go through and carry out with a terrorist attack. With addition to Department of Homeland Security, the federal government also created the Patriot Act. It was signed by President Bush in October 2001. It was intended to strengthen national security by giving law enforcement more tools and more resources to fight terrorism. They used existing measures such as wiretapping and access to financial documents and things of that nature, what they were using before with to prevent organized crime and crimes related to drug trafficking. So they were just allotted the resources to apply those functions to terrorism as well. Though the actual Department of Homeland Security is a major federal law enforcement unity of several agencies, the aspect or the philosophy of Homeland Security is not just a federal duty or federal responsibility. It goes down to local law enforcement as well, because often they're on the front lines of subduing or preventing a terrorist attack from happening, minutes or hours before they actually happen. And since New York City, is classically a major target for some of these terrorists because it's an economic symbol of the Western world and certainly of America, they created their own counterterrorism bureau, which is it's a sub-department organization that specializes in just counterterrorism and nothing else. They do so by keeping up with technology and advanced training in those aspects, somewhat paramilitary training, and detection of chemical substances, things that would be used for creation of explosive devices, and look for suspicious behavior in large crowds, especially at major events held in the city. And they really changed their aspects of what they do since September 11th. Before that, it was more, like I mentioned earlier, about organized crime and drug trafficking, but now local law enforcement plays a major role in anti-terrorism in the United States just as much as federal law enforcement agencies would. With less, restrictions and more responsibility applied to federal law enforcement and to DHS, things like the Patriot Act, and even local law enforcement, since they have more, tools and more leeway with what they can do about apprehending terrorists. It drew a lot of criticism, which eventually draw a lot of legal hurdles that the Justice Department and Department of Homeland Security had to go through or sort out some of the things that may or may not be unconstitutional that they were doing. Mainly like the wiretappings were a main concern for a lot of people that, just normal Americans that had nothing to do with terrorism. They didn't want people listening on their conversations. It's kind of some people would see that as a government overstepping its boundaries and being too powerful, too strong if they could legally do that without any repercussions or warnings or anything like that. So the question kind of boils down to, how much liberty or how much security do we want, and how much do we want to sacrifice one for the other? With a lot of liberty, we might not have as much security, but if we have ultimate security, we would definitely sacrifice a lot of personal liberties. And this, came down to a couple court cases where there's one in New York State, and just a district court found that the federal and local law enforcement access to financial records of businesses without warrant was in fact unconstitutional. So they had to rewrite that and sort out that issue to make it more constitutionally viable, so more people are happy at the end of the day. As I briefly mentioned earlier, the future of law enforcement is definitely moving towards counterterrorism as well as other crimes too that they've already been focusing on. But the main thing is new training, new techniques, new technology, that sort of thing to keep up with how these terrorist factions are functioning. And an often overlooked thing which has to associate with terrorism is not just the acts of terror, but the funding and how all the money channels together, who's funding these terrorist factions, who's giving them supplies, especially with domestic terrorism, because it's often overlooked thing is there's a lot of domestic terrorists trying to make their plots and stuff, but they often are funded or supplied by foreign entities that believe in their cause or believe in inflicting mass damage on American lives. And just at the end of the day, it's going to be a balance of how much civil liberties we want and how much national security we want. If we do give up some civil liberties, we might get more national security, but it's definitely a philosophical question that many people would have different opinions on, and we all need to get together on that so we can move forward and see where we want to go with that, and how hard do we want to fight this terrorism, or how hard do we or how much liberties are we willing to give up to fight terrorism. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you and have a nice day.